Okay, thanks everyone for coming along this afternoon to listen to us talking about the IMDEX Structural IQ solution. In terms of how we'll run the webinar this afternoon, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them into the interface, but we might hold until the end to give answers just so that we can move along. But if on the other hand you have a critical problem with your audio, please pop your hand up. You should see a button on your console that allows you to do that, and we'll try and rectify the problem if it sits with us. So as I said, we're here today to talk about the IMDEX Structural IQ solution. One of the things that you might notice through the course of my presentation is that my language might swap between IMDEX and REFLEX. IMDEX is our parent company. Our two brands are REFLEX and AMC, and the components of this solution are actually a mix of REFLEX and AMC products, thus us calling it an IMDEX solution. This title slide here is actually pretty illustrative of what it is that IMDEX actually does as a business these days. You can see here the traditional components of our business, survey instruments measuring the trajectory of a drill hole as it's drilled, and over here you can see a piece of core being oriented as it's being drilled, which, as I said, are kind of traditionally what REFLEX is known of as. For those of you with sharp eyes, you might see a green mud bucket up here, and also an SIU, which is AMC technology. What you can also see on the diagram now are some of the newer things that we're starting to bring into this space. For example, gamma for reading petrophysical properties down a drill hole operated by a driller. And of course, a big part of what we've been doing over the last few years is IoT enabling all of our tools. So really, when I talk about the Structural IQ solution today, what we want to show is how we're starting to see how all sorts of components of the things that we do within IMDEX can be married together to answer some of the big industry problems. Okay, so why IMDEX? Well, we've got a history of winning awards for our technologies, both from our traditional sensors and now, as I said, things like REFLEX are also getting recognition within the marketplace. This concept of an end-to-end solution is pretty rare within technology providers. We don't just give you core orientation tools or survey tools or structural logging tools. We give them to you all together. And we partner for success. So when we start talking about solutions, we don't just mean our own technologies. We actually have started to partner with groups like Acquire and Leapfrog so that we can give you what a true end-to-end solution in this space might look like. Another really big thing about IMDEX is that we have a large global presence. Wherever you're drilling, we are as well, is what we like to say. So what's the big picture problem that we're trying to solve with our Structural IQ solution? Well, if you think about the structural data that you're making critical decisions on, about where your ore body is or how you design your mine, you'll know that the collection of that data is an extremely slow, extremely inefficient and extremely painful process, which as a result tends to have a really long cycle between data collection and data interpretation, and even worse, by the time you get to the point of data interpretation, you don't trust the quality of your data, so you might throw it all out anyway and actually end up making these really big decisions based on very little data at all. So we've set out to change that by connecting quite a few of our technologies together. And this is what that looks like. So we use this concept of a wheel quite often to illustrate the components of our bigger solutions. And if we look at something like Structural IQ, you can see that the components that it's made up of are our survey tools, so our Easy Gyro and our Easy Track, which are used to measure the position of the drill hole. And then we have things like our core orientation tool, which are used to measure the orientation of the drill core within the hole. And then littler things like our core removal tool, which allows core to be easily removed from the core barrel, preserving that core orientation line. So these two things together allow you to know where the hole is, where the core is within the hole. And then we have our new technology onto the market, the REFLEX IQ-LOGGER, which enables you to actually collect the structural data, which was your reason for orienting the drill core in the first place. Other components of the system are AMC's products such as Corewell, which again allow you to protect the integrity of your core so that any core orientation line is more likely to be preserved and you're more likely to be able to collect structural data. And then at the end of the puzzle here we have REFLEX IQ, which is our program for collecting and for interpreting data. One of the things that some of you may know if you're IQ users is we've just recently introduced stereo nets into the IQ world. And then in the centre, joining all of these together, we have REFLEXHUB-IQ, which is our cloud platform. Now this collects data from all of these different tools in the field, aggregates them together, which I'll show you as part of today, and that's a pretty cool thing, and then delivers it out into IQ for further interpretation, but also out into packages like Acquire and Leapfrog so that you can store your data in your endpoint database and so that you can do 3D interpretation of your structural information. So as I said, it's a true end-to-end solution. So now let's dive in and have a look at how it all strings together, so to speak. Okay, so the start of the journey is in fact REFLEXHUB-IQ. Within REFLEXHUB-IQ, we allow geologists to plan their drilling programs and then push that information out onto all of the tools that sit within our fleet. So I'm only going to give you a very brief overview today of a couple of the planning steps. The first of these would be to plan some information about a drill hole. So I'll give it a name that you should all recognise as we go along. You can see there's lots of information that I could enter as part of this process, but for the purposes of today I'll keep it to the minimum. Now you can see here a couple of things. Now obviously one of the things that the IQ logger needs is to know what the straight line path of the hole is, the dip and the azimuth, and you can see I just entered those in there. When we go into the software you'll see what that allows me to do as data is being collected. One of the other just little nice things along the way is you can see that because we have all sorts of different survey tools is we handle all of those true north, magnetic north, grid north type conversions for you within our system. So we'll just add that drill hole now. And if I just go now, and the only other thing I need to do is to make that hole active. So if I just sort to bring that hole near the top, there it is. And then I just need to activate it. What that basically means now is it's available to all of our apps and devices out in the field to collect data against that drill hole information. Now another thing for our IQ logger, and again you'll see why this is useful, that we let people do is when you're collecting structural data, you obviously want to put some metadata against it, some information about the nature of that structure. And we let you design your own lists to do that. We don't constrain that in any way. So for example, here is the main list for describing features within IQ logger. I can go in here and if I want to I can add new codes. So we can do that on a project by project basis. I need to tell it it's a plane or a line because IQ logger can collect both types of data, and then I can just create a feature type. And you'll see in a moment when I go into IQ logger that that information is synced down to the device. So you can create lists that the IQ logger software can then use. Great. So as I said, the next step in the process then would be for you to go and collect some structural data. So I'm going to open up the software that runs the IQ logger now. And it's a piece of desktop software that we ship as part of the product when you rent our tool. Okay. Unlike all of our devices, one of the things it has on it is a big green, in this case actually it's blue, for the drillers we make big green sync buttons, that allows you to pull information down from the hub. Okay, so it tells me that that's happened successfully. And if I now go into the demo project, you should see that amongst other holes, you can see down here we have Web 01, which is the hole I just created. If I click on that now, You can see it's come down with all that information I entered in on the hub in terms of grid and azimuth, and it's also brought down this feature list including that fault 2 code that I created. I can then go in and give it my name so we know who's doing all the hard work here. I can tell it whether the core alignment is top and bottom of whole, and then I'm good to go and collect structural data. Okay, so I'm actually going to demonstrate this part of the functionality mostly using a video because I'm a chicken, but in essence as proof of life what I will do now is just show you that the IQ logger is in the room and does exist. Okay, so there I am. Here's my friendly piece of dual core, and here is the IQ logger. I will come back again and show it to you. But you can see that as I move the IQ logger around and point it to surfaces on my dual core, you can see how the software is responding. So you'll kind of be able to imagine as I go back in and show you using just the software what it is that I'm doing with my hand. Here's me running along the dual core, keeping track of depth, and here's me taking structural readings. Okay, so if we go now to the video I prepared earlier. Okay, so before I start, I'll just tell you a few things about the IQ logger. So if you look at it, it's actually a pretty simple device. It's made up of a laser which protrudes a plane of light out from the front of the device, and as you'll see as the video goes along, you line that up with structures within your drill core to get the orientation of the device correct relative to that structure. It then has a gyro within it so that it actually then knows what its orientation is in space relative to the orientation line on the drill core. Other things that it's got in it that you can't quite see, it's got 2 wheels sitting underneath the IQ logger, and it's those wheels running along the core that keep track of your depth as you're logging. Then on the top here you've got a couple of buttons, and on the side here you've got a button, and they're used to align the device in the case of the buttons on the side, collect data, to actually say you want to take a structural reading on the front button, and then the back button is for changing feature type. But we'll see that as we go along. So you can see here I am in a beautiful coat, just going through now and setting up and getting ready to do that logging. Again, I'll show you this in the software as well. This is just illustrating the process. There's that laser, and here I am now running along the orientation line. First I'm aligning it, and then I'm running along the dual core, getting to a structure and taking a reading. And then continuing on, going to another structure, taking another reading. So you can see there, obviously what we're doing is we're running along the core orientation line. I mentioned at the start that the device needs to know where it is relative to that core orientation line, which is what we achieve by running along it. And as I mentioned, there are wheels which are incrementing the depth as we go along. Now you can manually change the depth as well. So when you get to a core block, you can check against that core block and change the depth and then increment from that point. And now the next thing that the video is going to show you is what you can also do is change your structure type. Now you saw me there taking readings in a couple of different orientations. One of them may have been a vein, one of them may have been a fault. You can use that back button on the device to make that differential between the structure type that you're recording. Okay, so then the other thing that you can see here is you can also log core whilst it's sitting outside of the drill tray. Now, obviously, one of the benefits that we think we have is that you can log the core without lifting out of the tray, and there's a real time saving in that. But if you've got a feature that you can't quite see whilst it's in the core tray, you can just lift it out. You then simply just realign the device by pressing on the side, as you saw me do, and then you can collect that structure. The only trick is that you need to make sure that the orientation line is still pointing down the hole. Don't turn the core around the other way. That will confuse the entire system. And then the last thing you can see here is logging over a core break. You can see there that manual depth adjustment. Now, obviously, when the wheels are off the core, they're not keeping record of depth. So you can skip over bits of core like that, and as I said, manually change the depth if you want to. Another little trick for users out there is you can run the device along the side of the core tray instead and keep a track of your depth that way, if that helps. Okay, so that's the video component of today's proceedings. So just now going back into the app, in essence showing you the same sort of thing. Find the right tab. Okay, so here I am again with my IQ logger. So again, just sharing my webcam with you again. I'll switch it off though, not to alarm you. Actually, I'll just make sure I've got the core in view. And so here's that same sort of process. So you can see here I can also use the software to define what I'm doing. So I might want to log some bedding initially. So I can run along the drill core until I get a structure I want to measure, and then I can go in, line up with a laser, and then I can just press the button to collect. And I might want to do it a few different times to actually get a few different bedding readings in through at the same point. I'll show you in a moment that I can change the depths on those as well if I think they're incorrect. I might then, you can imagine, continue on along the core and actually decide now I want to do is I want to collect a fault with a completely different orientation, and you can do that too. So data collection, as you can see, very quick and simple to do. But then when the real beauty starts to come in is that because I've put that straight line path in for the drill hole at the start, the software is actually capable of calculating a dip and dip direction for me in real time, and that means that I can see the data on a stereo net in real time. So you can see here all my bedding readings are plotting up here, all the readings on the mosquito fault are plotting together. This point here is the drill hole projection, and we use that for QA purposes as well. What this means is what I can do now is I can do some QA. I can say actually that point there, I think I messed it up, I'm going to delete it. This one here, I think the depth on this is incorrect. These readings were actually taken deeper down the hole. This structure here, actually that wasn't bedding, that's cleavage. These ones here, actually I want to collect a bit more metadata against them. These fields are also controlled from the hub. So you can see you can build up quite a lot of metadata very quickly, and you in essence can be doing your QA and your interp at the same time as you're actually collecting your structural data. So that's all great. So how does this start really tying together as a solution though? You've collected your data now, you're pretty happy with it, but the hole that you drilled was actually not a straight hole, it curved a little. So what you would really love to be able to do is compare this data or recorrect this data for the true path of the drill hole. I'm about to show you how you can do that. One of the other things that you might have discovered as you were logging this information is that some of your orientation lines might not be as reliable as you thought they were. You can flag this here using the QA flag. One of the things you can also do, and again I'll show you this up in the hub, is you can actually go and have a look at the QA data from our core orientation tool, the ACT tool, and actually see, yes indeed the drillers did have an issue when they collected that piece of core orientation data. So you can see how they all start to marry together. But for now, what I need to do is go and sync this data to the hub in the first place. So you can see now it's warning me I've got a project with a sync status of red, i.e. there's some data the hub hasn't seen. So I can change that now. Okay, successfully synced to the hub. Now, I haven't got my email switched on this afternoon, but you need to imagine that if I did, I would have received an email notification that that data had arrived. And when I come into the hub, I also get a notification here that there's new structural data for a drill hole available for me to go and look at. Now, if I click on that, that takes me to a component of the hub that we call Approve. And it's in here that we allow you or a supervisor perhaps to view and approve survey data that's been collected out, structural data that's been collected out in the field. So if I go in here now, you can see here's that exact same data that I collected in the field for review, and you can see that that QA flag that I put on in the field means this record is flagged in red, and it might mean that my supervisor now goes in and says, actually, I do want to reject that point and not have that in the structural insert either. That doesn't remove it from the database, but you can see it has disappeared from the StereoNet now. And it means that you could now export this data, not including that rejected point. Now, obviously, that's data that we collected right now to show that it was real, but for demo purposes, I'll show you some pretty data we collected earlier for this drill hole here, Theo Surface Hole 2. And what I want to illustrate here is this integration between our different holes, our different tools. So, as I said, when you first collect data using the IQ logger, it actually comes in using the straight line path of the planned drill hole. And you can see how that data plots on the StereoNet. But if for that same drill hole you've used some of our survey tools, our north-seeking gyro tool or our magnetic tool, the Easy Track, then what you can do is you can actually change and correct that data to reflect the true path of the hole. Now, for those of you who've done this in Excel, you know what a mighty data kludge this is. And in contrast, there was me doing it with the click of a button. And I think you all saw how far that caused those dip and dip direction readings to move. We also recalculate all the XY positions of the structures as well. So at the end of this process, you've clicked one button and you have ready for export and viewing exactly the data you need for interpretation. So I just want to show you too that for that same drill hole, for example, because you've collected the survey data in the hub, you can go through and actually have a look and do a QA assessment on the survey data as well. So I won't show you this in any detail, but this is really just to illustrate the sort of things that you might also be doing within the hub environment. So in a moment, a 3D viewer is going to pop up over here that actually has all of the survey data for this drill hole plotted up and some QA flags here that are based on that survey tool metadata. So that can be extremely valuable as well for assessing the quality of your survey data. Now, as I mentioned, the other tool that forms part of this solution is our core orientation tool, the ACT tool, which is our digital core orientation tool. And what we allow you to do for that, as I mentioned, is if we go in here and have a look at ACT data, let's just scroll down to the bottom and I'll just show you our demo hole. Okay, so you can see here that what we actually provide you is some metadata from the tool as it's collecting and an indication whether that core orientation passed or failed QA, and if it failed, the reasons why. So as I mentioned before, what this would enable you to do is if you'd collected some structural data and you were concerned that it wasn't making sense and you thought it might be a problem with the core orientation itself, you can quickly go back and have a look and see whether or not the driller did have some sort of issue when collecting that orientation data. In particular, things like did they spin the tool when breaking off from the core orientation. So that's really fantastic as well. And then the final piece of the puzzle, as I said, is that you will want to do data interpretation. And to do that, we allow integration with IOGAS and also with other packages like Leapfrog. And the way we operate that is using these things called save searches, where basically you set up a package of data that you want, say the IQ logger data corrected based on the survey tools from the last month, and you set it up as a saved search. So let me just show you me doing that. So we'll pick the demo project. We'll pick now, rather than the ACT data, we'll pick the IQ logger data, and we'll view it, and then we can save that search as IQ. And that then saves that search. Now, of course, that means that you can come back into the hub at any time and see that data, but also incredibly usefully, what that allows you to do is to go into IOGAS and recover that saved search straight away as well. Now, in the interest of time, I won't show you that bit today. I really just wanted to finish off by showing you some pretty pictures of what StereoNet interpretation looks like within the hub, so that within IOGAS, so that you can go and check it out for yourself. I'm sure many of you are IOGAS users, and this is just part of the standard license now. So you can see on my screen here I have a few different displays. I've just pulled up a legend for you. This first one is the closest to a conventional display, and you can imagine we have all the sorts of functions in terms of different stereo nets. You can see here we're plotting structures as both the poles and as the planes, and as I hover over each pole you can see that it's showing me what its plane is, and you can see over here, based on the legend, that these are things that have been classified by IOGAS as being veins. Of course, this is the beauty of using IOGAS for this sort of thing, is you can slice and dice your data by type, by assay data, by whatever else you've got flagged against it. We also put the greater circle, the best fit great circle, through those poles for the vein, and then give you the beta over here, which of course, if this was folded bedding, for example, this would give you what the fold angle was. So you can see there, those are all your planes data, also showing lineations on there. So all of that sort of functionality that you're used to in a StereoNet package we have, with that little bit of extra gas magic because of our way of categorizing data. But we also have other displays. This one's obviously a 3D, a true 3D hemisphere, half hemisphere of the data. And you can see that's quite nice, to be honest, mostly for teaching purposes as to what a StereoNet's actually doing. And then coming out in the 6.3 release, you can see here, this is something else that we're very commonly use in IOGAS, is this concept of density contouring of points, i.e. where does most of my data actually sit, so that I can get a feel for what it really means. And of course, being the IOGAS geeks that we are, we've actually done this contouring in a special way that only works for hemispherical data, rather than just going and doing it the way people might normally. Okay, so that pretty much brings me to the end of what I wanted to give people an overview of for today. I'm conscious, obviously, that we move through it at pace. There's lots of detail behind components of this. More than happy to follow up with individuals to talk about different parts of the solution. Obviously, all of this is available for people to rent and to try for themselves, and really interested to hear from people who want to do that sort of thing as well. So on that basis, I'd like to thank everyone again for listening in this afternoon. This is something that we're really excited about, that we think will make a big difference to how people interpret and collect their structural data, and we look forward to hearing any feedback that anybody has. Thanks again for your time.